What if the most powerful princess in the entire galaxy chose a human? Not a king, not a warlord, not an alien noble with armies behind his name. A human. Just a regular man. No crown, no fleet, no royal bloodline stretching back 10,000 years. She had rejected every single noble who came before him. Hundreds of them. From dozens of worlds. Each one more powerful than the last. Each one more certain she would say yes. She said no to every single one. But then, she saw him. And everything changed. This is not a simple love story. This is a story about pride, power, and one impossible moment that shook an entire galactic empire to its core. In this story, you are going to discover 3 things that will completely blow your mind. First, why the most feared princess in the known galaxy could not stand any noble who walked through her doors. Second, what one ordinary human did that every powerful alien in the universe failed to do. And third, the truth behind what happened after she made her choice. The truth that her own family tried to bury forever. Stay with us. Because this story gets more incredible with every single part. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Her name was Zar-El, and in every corner of the known galaxy that name meant one thing. Power. She was the only daughter of Emperor Drathon of the Velkhari Empire. The Velkhari were not just powerful, they were ancient. Their civilization had been alive for over 40,000 years. They had conquered stars. They had built worlds. They had ended wars simply by showing up. And Zar-El was the crown jewel of all of it. She was tall. She had green skin that shimmered like polished jade under the twin suns of her home planet, Velkor Prime. Her eyes were gold. Not brown, not hazel, pure gold, like 2 coins burning from the inside. Her hair was long and black, falling past her shoulders like a waterfall of dark silk. She was beautiful by every standard in the galaxy. But beauty was not what made people fear her. What made people fear her was her mind. Zar-El had memorized every treaty, every war strategy, and every political map of the known galaxy by the time she was 12 years old. By 15, she had already advised her father's war council on 3 military decisions. 2 of those decisions ended conflicts that had been going on for decades. She was not just a princess. She was a weapon wrapped in royal robes. And her father loved her more than anything in his empire. But Emperor Drathon had a problem. He was getting old. Not old the way humans get old. Velkhari aging was different. Slower. But there were signs. His hands shook sometimes during council meetings. His voice, which once could silence a room just by raising in tone, now cracked on the edges. He needed a successor. Someone to carry the empire forward. And Velkhari law was ancient and unmovable. The throne could only pass through a bonded pair. A married couple. The emperor could not simply give the crown to his daughter alone. She had to be bonded, officially, ceremonially, permanently, to someone worthy. And that someone would co-rule beside her. It was a law written 40,000 years ago. Nobody questioned it. Nobody dared. So the emperor did what emperors do. He called for the selection. Word went out across every star system, every allied world, every noble house in the Velkhari Empire and beyond. The message was simple. Send your greatest sons, your strongest leaders, your wisest heirs. Come and stand before the princess. She will choose one. Noble houses erupted into celebration. Planets held ceremonies just to send off their candidates. Alien lords spent fortunes on gifts, on warships to escort them, on specially crafted robes and armor designed to impress Velkhari royalty. 43 nobles arrived for the first selection ceremony. 43 of the most powerful, most impressive, most accomplished beings in the known galaxy. Zar-El walked into the selection hall wearing a black dress trimmed in gold. Her crown sat perfectly on her head. Her golden eyes moved across the room slowly, looking at each noble one by one. The hall was silent. The nobles stood in a long line. Some were massive, 7 feet tall with scales and 4 arms. Some were slender and elegant, from the crystal worlds of the Aryan system. Some had military medals covering their entire chests. One had brought a live war beast on a chain, trying to show off his dominance. Zarahel walked the entire line. She looked at each one. Then she turned to her father, who sat on his throne watching everything with careful eyes. She said one word, "No." The hall erupted. Voices rose. Nobles stepped forward in protest. One lord from the Drexian system actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. It was not a joke. Zeril walked calmly out of the hall without looking back. The selection was over. 43 nobles dismissed in under 5 minutes. The emperor sat very still on his throne for a long time. His advisors leaned in close, whispering urgently. This had never happened before. This was a crisis. The noble houses would be furious. The political consequences alone could destabilize 3 border regions. But Drathon said nothing for a moment. Then he sighed. "Schedule another selection," he said quietly. "Give it 3 months." The second selection had 61 nobles. Same result. Zarael walked the line. Walked out. Said no. The third selection had 89 nobles. They came from farther planets this time. Some had never even set foot on Velcor Prime before. They had trained specifically for this moment. They had studied the princess. They had learned her language, her history, her preferences. Same result. No. By the fourth selection, the galaxy was whispering. People were calling her impossible. Some nobles refused to participate at all, calling the whole thing humiliating. Political tensions were rising across multiple systems. And in the Valkyrie Palace, behind closed doors, Emperor Drathon was running out of time. His hands were shaking more now. His advisors were barely hiding their panic. There was one council member named Lord Veth who had a solution. Lord Veth was old, ambitious, and dangerous. He suggested that the emperor simply force the selection. Choose a noble for the princess. Arrange the bonding without her agreement. It had been done before in the ancient days. Drathon looked at Lord Veth for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "She is my daughter," he said. "Not a treaty." Veth bowed and said nothing more. But his eyes said plenty. Meanwhile, Zarael was not unaware of the pressure around her. She felt it everywhere. In the way her handmaidens looked at her in the mornings. In the way conversations stopped when she walked into council rooms. In the way her father hugged her a little longer every time she saw him. She was not heartless. She understood what was at stake. But she also had a reason for rejecting every noble that had come before. A reason she had not told anyone. Not even her father. She had been watching the nobles very carefully during each selection. Not for wealth. Not for strength. Not for political connections. She was watching for something else. Something small. Something almost invisible. She was watching for the moment when they looked at her. Really looked at her. And she could see in their eyes exactly what they were thinking. And every single noble, no matter how polished, no matter how trained, no matter how impressive on paper, had the same look in their eyes. They were not seeing her. They were seeing the throne. They were seeing the empire, the power, the legacy. They were seeing everything she came with, not her. And Zarael, who had spent her entire life being studied and measured and admired from a careful distance, had decided something quietly, privately, years ago. She would wait. She would wait for someone who looked at her, just her, and saw a person, not a prize, not a throne, not an empire. She did not know if that person existed anywhere in the universe. She was beginning to think maybe they did not. And then came the fifth selection. And everything changed, because this time, standing at the far end of the line, slightly out of place in a clean blue uniform with small badge patches on both shoulders, was something nobody had expected. Nobody had planned. Nobody had authorized. A human. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 29 years old. He was from a city called Manchester, in a country called England, on a small, unremarkable planet called Earth. He had brown hair, cut short and neat. He was tall for a human, about 6 feet. But standing next to some of the alien nobles around him, he looked almost small. He was not supposed to be in that hall. Not even close. Ethan Cole was a diplomatic security officer. A guard. Not even a high-ranking one. He worked for the small human diplomatic mission that had recently arrived on Velcor Prime. Earth had only made formal contact with the Velkari Empire 14 months earlier. They were still new, still figuring out the rules, still learning which customs mattered, and which ones could be bent. Apparently, nobody had explained the selection customs clearly enough. Here is what happened. The human diplomatic mission had received a formal invitation to send a representative to the palace for what the invitation called a ceremonial cultural event of the highest political importance. The message had been translated 3 times before reaching the mission director, a nervous man named Director Hollis, who had spent most of his career filing paperwork and had never expected to end up on an alien planet. Director Hollis had read the invitation 4 times. He had then panicked quietly in his office for about 40 minutes. Then he had made a decision that would go down in the history books of 2 civilizations. He sent Ethan, not because Ethan was special, not because Ethan had diplomatic training or royal protocol experience or any of the qualities you would want in a person attending the selection ceremony of the most powerful alien princess in the galaxy. He sent Ethan because Ethan was standing closest to the door when the director walked out of his office looking for someone to represent Earth. That was it. That was the entire decision. Ethan had shown up at the palace with his uniform pressed neatly, his badge polished, and absolutely no idea what a selection ceremony was. A palace attendant had pointed him toward the hall. He had followed the line of nobles inside, assuming this was some kind of reception or formal greeting event. He stood at the end of the line. He straightened his posture. He put his hands behind his back the way he always did when standing at attention. He looked around at the massive alien nobles surrounding him, and thought to himself, very quietly, that he might be in the wrong room. But he stayed, because leaving seemed rude. The hall had gone very quiet when Zarel entered. Ethan noticed that immediately. The shift in the room. Every noble straightening up. Some of them adjusting their robes, their weapons, their posture. A subtle wave of tension moving through the space like a current. And then she walked in. Ethan watched her move down the line. He watched the way she looked at each noble. Measured. Careful. Like she was reading something written on each of their faces. He noticed that her expression never really changed. It stayed calm. Controlled. Like a person who had long ago learned not to show what they were thinking. He understood that kind of expression. He had worn it himself in difficult situations. On bad days at work. In moments when everything was hard, and you needed to keep going anyway. He recognized it. Not from admiration. Not from analysis. Just from being a person who had felt something similar. She reached the end of the line. She reached him. She stopped. She looked at him the way she had looked at every other noble. Measured. Careful. Ethan looked back at her. And then, without thinking, without planning, without any diplomatic training telling him what to do, he said the first honest thing that came into his head. "You look exhausted," he said. The hall went completely silent. Not the polite silence of before. A shocked silence. The kind that happens when something so unexpected occurs that even the air seems to pause. 2 of the Velkari palace guards actually took a step forward. One of the senior nobles from the Drexian system let out a sharp sound that was the alien equivalent of a horrified gasp. Zarel stared at him. Nobody had ever said that to her. Not once. Not in her entire life. Every noble who had ever stood before her had offered compliments. Flowery, elaborate, carefully rehearsed compliments about her beauty, her power, her lineage, her empire. Words designed to impress, to charm, to win. This man had just told her she looked tired. Her golden eyes studied him for a long moment. He was not flinching. He was not apologizing. He was not scrambling to correct himself. He was just looking at her steadily. The way someone looks at another person when they have said something real and they mean it. "I have been told," she said slowly, "that one does not speak to the princess without being addressed first." "Sorry," Ethan said. "I didn't know that. I'm new." Another shocked silence. Then something happened that the nobles, the guards, and every attendant in that hall would talk about for years afterward. Zarel almost smiled. It was tiny, barely visible, just the smallest shift at the corner of her mouth. There and gone in under a second. But Ethan saw it. And something in his chest shifted, just slightly, in a way he did not fully understand yet. She moved on, finished the line, walked to her father's throne. The selection waited for her verdict. Every noble stood rigid with anticipation. She turned around. She looked across the room one more time. Her eyes traveled down the long line of powerful, armored, perfectly prepared nobles, and landed on the human in the blue uniform at the far end. She held that gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said the word that shattered the silence. Him. The room exploded. Voices erupted from every corner. The Drexian lord actually dropped something. 2 of the northern nobles started shouting at once. Lord Veth stood up from his council seat so fast his chair fell backward. Emperor Drathan sat perfectly still on his throne. He looked at his daughter. She looked back at him. Her expression was calm, decided, completely certain. He looked then at the human standing at the end of the line, who was looking around at the chaos erupting in the room, with an expression that said, very clearly, that he had absolutely no idea what had just happened. The Emperor was quiet for a very long time. Then he exhaled slowly. "Clear the hall," he said. The news spread faster than any ship in the Valkyrie fleet could travel. Within hours, every noble house in the Empire knew. Within a day, the story had jumped across diplomatic channels to a dozen other star systems. Within 3 days, the entire known galaxy was talking about it. The Valkyrie princess had chosen a human. The reactions came in waves. The noble houses were furious. Not just disappointed. Not just insulted. Furious in the deep, cold way that powerful people get angry when they feel humiliated. Families who had spent years grooming their sons for this moment, who had called in political favors and spent enormous resources just to get a place in the selection, felt that fury burning in their chests like a coal. Lord Veth moved fast. He was in 3 private meetings before the sun set on Velcor Prime that same day. He was talking to the right people, choosing his words carefully, planting the right seeds. He used phrases like stability of the Empire, and the integrity of the selection, and the well-being of the Emperor. He never said outright that Zarel had made a mistake. He was too smart for that. He simply asked questions. Careful questions. The kind that make people think the doubt was their own idea. Is a human really qualified to stand beside the Valkyrie throne? What does Earth even bring to the Empire? Is the princess, perhaps, not thinking clearly? The seeds took root quickly. Inside the palace, things were not much calmer. Ethan Cole had been moved to a set of guest quarters in the royal wing, rooms that were clearly designed for someone much taller, and with a different number of limbs than him, but which had been hurriedly adjusted to be more suitable. He had been given a personal attendant, a small, quick-moving Valkyrie servant named Doss, who communicated mostly through hand gestures and who seemed perpetually on the edge of panic. Ethan sat on the edge of the enormous bed in his quarters and tried very hard to understand what had happened to his life. He had been sent to attend a cultural event. He was now apparently engaged to a princess. He had tried to explain the situation to Director Hollis through a secured communication channel. That conversation had lasted 40 minutes and ended with Hollis saying, in a very controlled voice, that he needed to lie down and would call back. He had not called back yet. Ethan spent his first night in the palace unable to sleep, staring at a ceiling that glowed softly with shifting patterns of blue and gold. He thought about Manchester. He thought about his small apartment there, which he had rented for 3 years, and which had a slightly broken radiator that made noise in winter. He thought about his mother, who called him every Sunday without fail, and would absolutely lose her mind when she found out about this. He thought about the princess. Specifically about the moment she had almost smiled. That one tiny moment. There had been something in it. Something real. He could not name it exactly. But he recognized it the way you recognize a song you have not heard in a long time, something familiar in an unfamiliar place. The next morning, Zarel requested a private meeting with him. No attendants, no guards in the room, just the two of them in a large sitting chamber with enormous windows overlooking the palace gardens below. She was already there when he walked in, standing near the window, looking out at the gardens with her hands clasped behind her back, still wearing royal clothes, but her crown was gone this time. Her hair was down. She looked, he thought privately, slightly more human without the crown, in the best possible way. She turned when he entered. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She stayed standing. She looked at him for a moment with those gold eyes. "You did not know what the selection was," she said. "It was not a question." "No," he said honestly. "I thought it was a reception dinner." A pause. "You had no plan," she said. "No strategy, no prepared speech." "I had nothing," he confirmed. "Then why did you say what you said? To me, in the hall." He thought about it honestly. "Because it was true," he said. "You look tired. I've seen that look before. On people who are carrying something heavy and not letting anyone see it." She was quiet for a moment. "Every noble who came before you," she said slowly, "told me I was magnificent, powerful, radiant. They told me I was worthy of the stars themselves." She paused. "Not one of them asked if I was all right." Ethan looked at her steadily. "Are you all right?" The silence that followed was long, and then Zar-El, the most feared princess in the known galaxy, the woman who had dismissed 89 of the most powerful beings in the universe without blinking, sat down across from the human in the blue uniform and said something she had not said to another living soul in years. "No," she said quietly. "I am not." That was the moment the story truly began. Not in the selection hall. Not in the chaos afterward. Not in the political storms swirling through the noble houses. Here. In this quiet room. With two people talking honestly for the first time. Ethan did not offer solutions. He did not offer comfort in grand speeches. He simply asked her to tell him what was wrong. And she did. She told him about her father's condition. About the pressure of the selection. About years of being watched and measured, and never once being asked how she actually felt about any of it. She told him about Lord Veth, and the things she suspected he was doing behind closed doors. She told him about the law that bound the throne, the ancient rule that felt like a chain around her future. She talked for a long time. He listened to all of it. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then he said, "That sounds incredibly hard. I'm sorry you've been carrying all of that alone." She stared at him. "You are not afraid of me," she said. "Should I be?" he asked. "Everyone is afraid of me." "Maybe," he said. "They're afraid of your title. Not you." Another long silence. Outside the window, the twin suns of Velcor Prime were beginning their afternoon descent. The palace gardens glowed amber and gold below them. Zar-El looked at him for a long time. Then, she said something that surprised even herself. "I would like to speak with you again tomorrow." And for the first time in years, she meant it. Lord Veth did not waste time. While Ethan and Zar-El were having quiet conversations in sunlit rooms, Veth was working in the dark. That was where he had always done his best work. In shadows. In whispers, in the space between official meetings where real power was traded. He had spent 40 years building his position in the Valkyrie court. He was not the most powerful noble by title. But power and title are different things. Veth understood that better than almost anyone. He had allies. Carefully built relationships with 6 of the Empire's most influential noble houses. He had leverage over several council members. Not the illegal kind, he was careful about that. But the kind that comes from knowing the right information at the right time. And he had a plan. It had 3 stages. The first stage was already in motion. Discrediting the choice. Making the decision look reckless. Foolish. A symptom of a princess under too much pressure. Or perhaps being manipulated by Earth's diplomatic mission for political advantage. This was easy. The noble houses were already angry. Veth simply gave that anger direction. He arranged for a formal petition to be submitted to the Emperor's Council. The petition, signed by 11 noble houses, called for a formal review of the selection process. It raised concerns about irregularities and questions of eligibility regarding the chosen candidate. It was careful, legal, and devastatingly effective at creating public doubt. The second stage was more complicated. Veth needed to isolate Ethan, separate him from Zarl before their connection deepened any further. He needed to make the human look unworthy, incompetent, out of his depth in ways that even Zarael could not ignore. He arranged a series of formal events that the chosen candidate would be required to attend as per Velkhari bonding tradition. Ceremonies where specific protocols had to be followed perfectly. Situations that a Velkhari noble would have trained for since childhood. Situations designed to make a human look completely lost. The first was the ceremony of lineage, a formal presentation where the chosen candidate must speak before the full council and recite their lineage, their ancestors, their house history, their family's contributions to the empire, going back at least 15 generations. Ethan had 24 hours notice. He had approximately 0 generations of Velkhari lineage. When Doss, his small attendant, explained the ceremony requirements with a look of profound sympathy, Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up a data pad and started researching. He did not research alien lineage traditions. He could not fake that. He researched something else entirely. He researched what the ceremony was actually for. The purpose behind it. Why 40,000 years ago, the Velkhari had decided that a chosen partner needed to stand before the full council and speak about where they came from. He found the answer in a historical archive that had not been accessed in over 200 years. The ceremony had originally been designed not to prove wealth or power. It had been designed to prove character. The founders of the tradition believed that understanding where a person came from, their family's struggles, their history, their roots, revealed the kind of person they truly were. The noble houses had turned it into a performance of status over the centuries. But the original purpose was something different. The next day, Ethan stood before the full council of the Velkhari Empire. A long table of senior advisors, noble representatives, and Lord Veth, sitting at the far end with carefully neutral expression and sharp eyes. Ethan looked out at all of them. Then he spoke. He did not recite alien lineage. He spoke about his family. His real family. He talked about his grandfather who had worked in a factory in Manchester for 30 years, who had saved money his entire life so that Ethan's father could go to university. He talked about his mother, who had raised 3 children alone after his father got sick, who had never once complained about how hard it was. He talked about growing up in a city where the winters were gray and long, and the people were tough and warm at the same time. He talked about what it meant to come from regular people, people who never had power, or wealth, or titles, people who kept going anyway. The council chamber was completely silent. He finished speaking. Lord Veth's expression had shifted. Very slightly. Something he had not expected was moving behind his eyes. On the side of the room, partially visible through an observation screen, Zarel had been watching the whole thing. Her gold eyes were bright. Not with tears. With something fiercer than tears. The second ceremony Veth arranged was the combat acknowledgement, a tradition where the chosen partner participated in a ritual demonstration of strength before the noble houses. Not actual combat. It had been ceremonial for centuries. But it required physical confidence, a knowledge of Velkhari martial forms, and the kind of presence that made a room go quiet. Ethan spent 2 days watching recordings of the ritual. Then he went to the palace training courtyard every morning before sunrise. Doss watched him train from a safe distance, apparently both horrified and deeply impressed. He was not perfect. He did not perform the Velkhari forms with the precision of someone who had trained since childhood. His movements were rougher, more human, more straightforward. But he did not quit. And he did not pretend. When the combat acknowledgement came, he stepped into the courtyard before the assembled nobles, and performed the forms as well as he could. When he made mistakes, he corrected them and kept going. When he finished, he was breathing hard, and there was nothing polished about it. But it was real. Every movement was genuine. The noble houses were not impressed. But the Velkhari palace guards, Old soldiers who had seen 1,000 polished performances nodded quietly among themselves. Lord Veth watched all of this and recalculated. The human was not behaving the way he expected. He had expected excuses, avoidance, confusion. He had expected the human to look small and overwhelmed and obviously out of place. Instead, the human showed up every time. He did not pretend to be something he was not. He did not try to impress anyone with borrowed grandeur. He was just consistently, stubbornly, genuinely himself. And Veth recognized, with cold clarity, that this was a problem. Because the Velkari people, the ordinary citizens, the guards, the palace workers, were watching too. And they were starting to talk about the human in a way that Veth had not planned for. The Velkari people were not like their noble houses. The nobles were political creatures. Everything they saw, they filtered through questions of power and advantage. Who benefits? Who loses? What does this mean for our house? But ordinary Velkari people, the ones who lived in the great city of Veldara below the palace, who worked in the markets and the engineering yards and the schools and the food halls, they saw things differently. They had been watching the selection for years. They had watched their princess walk out of hall after hall, rejecting noble after noble, and many of them had privately cheered. They admired her for it, a princess who would not be sold, who would not be handed to the most powerful bidder, who had standards that even the richest families in the galaxy could not meet. She was their princess, not the noble house's princess, and now she had chosen someone, not a warlord, not an ancient bloodline, not a political alliance wrapped in royal robes, a human, a regular person from a small planet at the edge of explored space. The first Velkari citizen who publicly spoke about it was a woman who ran a food stall in the Veldara market. Her name was Korith, and she was 63 years old, and she had absolutely no fear of saying what she thought. She looked directly at a news recorder that had come through her market district and said, plainly and without hesitation, "Good. Maybe now the noble houses will remember that this empire belongs to its people, not just to them." The clip spread everywhere. More voices joined. Not all of them agreed. Some Velkari citizens shared the noble house's concerns. What did a human know about running an empire? What did Earth bring? Was this really wisdom? Or was it rebellion, wearing the mask of love? But many people responded to something they saw in the recordings of Ethan Cole. The ceremony of lineage recording had leaked. Someone, and Lord Veth suspected it was one of the palace guards, though he could never prove it, had released a full recording of Ethan's speech to the council into the public information network. People watched it. They watched a human stand in the most powerful room in the empire and speak honestly about factory workers and single mothers and gray winter cities. They watched him not pretend, not perform, not try to be what he was not. And something about that struck a nerve. Because the Velkari had spent 4,000 years building an empire, and in that time they had watched their noble class drift further and further from the reality of ordinary life. The nobles spoke of legacy and lineage and honor and empire. Beautiful words. Words that had grown, over the centuries, slightly hollow from overuse. This human spoke about his grandfather saving money, his mother raising children alone. Things that felt real in the way that cold water feels real. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Ethan and Zar-El were meeting every day. Their conversations had changed. The first meeting had been careful, almost formal despite its honesty. The second had been easier. By the fifth meeting, they were walking in the palace gardens in the late afternoon, talking the way people talk when they have stopped trying to manage how they appear to each other. She told him about the empire's history. Not the official version, the complex, messy, real version. The wars that had been regretted, the treaties that had been made for the wrong reasons, the moments when the Velkari had been genuinely great, and the moments when they had simply been powerful, which was a different thing. He listened carefully, asked questions. Not to show off his knowledge, he had very little, but because he was genuinely curious. She found that quality remarkable. Every noble who had ever spoken to her about the empire had been performing, demonstrating their understanding, competing for her approval. Even her advisors, Even her counsel framed everything through the lens of what she wanted to hear. Ethan asked questions because he actually wanted to know. She started asking him questions too. About Earth, about humans, about what it was like to grow up on a planet that had no idea the rest of the galaxy existed until very recently. He told her what he could remember of his childhood. The school where he had been a mediocre student but a very good listener. The neighborhood where everyone knew each other. The complicated, warm, exhausting experience of having a large extended family who argued constantly at holiday dinners and would do anything for each other in a crisis. She listened to all of it with an expression he was learning to read. Focused, taking it in seriously. Your people have no empire, she said once. No galactic fleet. No ancient treaties. You have barely reached your own moon. That's true, he agreed. Then how, she said, with genuine curiosity, do you walk in here without fear? He thought about it honestly. I think, he said slowly, because I'm not trying to win anything. I'm just trying to figure out what's real. She was quiet for a long moment. That, she said finally, is either very brave or very naive. Probably both, he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, almost to herself, the nobles were afraid of losing. You have nothing to lose. That is not the same as courage. But it is close. He looked back at her. I think you have a lot of courage, he said, saying no that many times, knowing what it would cost you, knowing the pressure you were under. That wasn't nothing. She looked slightly startled, like the compliment had come from a direction she had not expected. They all called me stubborn, she said. They were wrong, he said simply. You were waiting for something real. The gardens were quiet around them. The twin suns were low. The amber light turned everything gold. Neither of them spoke for a moment. And in that moment, something settled into place between them. Not with fireworks, or grand gestures, or the kind of dramatic declarations that noble houses write into their official bonding ceremonies. Just quietly. Gently. The way real things tend to happen. Lord Veth's third stage, his most dangerous plan, was almost ready. He had one final move to make, and it would change everything. Lord Veth's third stage was simple. Simple plans are often the most dangerous. He was going to expose the Emperor. Not with lies. That was the brilliant cruelty of it. With the truth. Emperor Drathon's condition was worse than most of the council knew. Veth had spent months quietly gathering information from palace physicians, from attendants, from anyone who had seen the Emperor in private moments. He had assembled a detailed picture of a man who was declining faster than official reports acknowledged. His plan was to present this information to the full council in formal session. Demand an immediate succession review. Argue that the Emperor's judgment, including his approval of an unqualified human as the princess's chosen partner, was compromised. If successful, the succession review would strip Drathon of executive authority temporarily. A regency council would be installed. Veth had already secured 3 of the 5 votes needed to control that council, and the first act of that council would be to void the selection, send the human home, restart the process under council oversight. This time, the plan was elegant, legal, devastating. He called the emergency council session on a morning when the twin suns were still low, and the palace had just begun to wake up. He walked into the council chamber with 11 noble house representatives behind him, and a data file in his hands that contained everything. He had not expected to find Zarl already sitting at the head of the council table when he walked in. She looked at him with those gold eyes, calm, decided, like someone who had seen this coming and had prepared. She had. The same person who had leaked the ceremony recording to the public, a palace guard named Oren, loyal to Zarl since childhood, had also been tracking Veth's meetings for weeks. He had reported everything to her, every private meeting, every quiet conversation, every name on the petition. She had known about Veth's plan for 4 days, and she had spent those 4 days preparing her own. When Veth entered with his allies and his data file, he found himself not in a room he controlled. He found a full council session already in progress, already called, already legally convened under the princess's authority, which was, as daughter and heir of the Emperor, substantial. He found Zarel sitting at the head of the table. He found Emperor Drathon seated to her right. And he found Ethan Cole seated to her left. Veth stopped walking. Zarel looked at him steadily. "Lord Veth," she said, "we have been expecting you. Please sit down." The chamber was completely silent. Veth looked around the room. He calculated quickly. His 11 House representatives were present, but so were 8 other council members he had not expected to be there. Senior members. Old guard. People whose votes he had assumed were neutral. Zarel had called them all. He sat down. What followed was not the destruction of Lord Veth that might make a satisfying dramatic moment in a lesser story. Zarel was not interested in destruction for its own sake. She was interested in the truth. She addressed the council directly. She acknowledged her father's condition. Openly. Without hiding it. Without the careful diplomatic language that had been cushioning it for months. She told the council that the emperor was declining, that this was known, that it had been the reason for the pressure around the selection from the beginning. She told the council that her father's judgment was not compromised, that he had in fact made one of the most difficult and right decisions of his reign, by refusing to force the selection against her will. She told them about Lord Veth's plan. In detail. With documentation. She told them something else too. Something nobody in the room had expected. She withdrew herself from the traditional bonding law, not by refusing it, by challenging it. She formally presented a proposal, one she and Ethan had been quietly preparing together over the past 4 days, that called for an amendment to the 40,000-year-old succession law. The amendment was simple. The throne of the Valkyrie Empire could pass to a single ruler. The bonding requirement, the ancient law that a partner was necessary, was to be reviewed, debated, and voted on, not dissolved immediately, not overturned in a moment. Reviewed. Properly. Through the correct legal channels. She was not tearing the empire down. She was asking it to grow. The council erupted. Not in rage, in conversation. Real conversation. The kind that had apparently not happened in that chamber in a very long time. Ethan sat quietly at her left hand through all of it. He did not speak unless spoken to. When council members addressed him with pointed questions about Earth's role in all of this, he answered honestly. Earth had no strategic interest in Valkyrie internal politics. He was one man who had shown up to what he thought was a dinner, and had ended up in the middle of a dynasty. Several council members almost laughed at that, even in the tension of the moment. Lord Veth did not laugh, but he also did not speak again. By late afternoon, the session had run for 6 hours. No votes were taken that day. The amendment proposal was formally submitted for a 30-day review period as Valkyrie law required. Lord Veth's emergency succession review was rejected on procedural grounds. The full council had already been convened under proper authority before his session could be called. His plan had failed. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with guards dragging him away. Simply, and legally, and completely. As the council chamber emptied, Ethan and Zarel walked out into the long corridor together. They walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "So what happens now?" She looked ahead. Now the council debates for 30 days. The noble houses will fight the amendment. Some will accept it. It will be long and difficult. "What about us?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "That," she said, "is perhaps the first question I do not have a prepared answer for." He nodded. Said nothing. "The amendment," she said slowly, "if passed, means I can rule alone. I would not require a partner for the throne." "I know," he said. "Which means," she continued, "that whatever exists between us, if anything does, would not be about the throne, would not be about the empire, would not be about political necessity." He looked at her. "It was never about that. Not for me." She looked back at him, and for the first time in front of another person, Zarel let the controlled expression go. Just for a moment. Not long. But fully. "I know," she said quietly. "That is why I chose you." They stood there in the long corridor of the most powerful palace in the galaxy. Twin suns setting outside the windows, empire debating in the rooms behind them, history shifting in ways that neither of them fully understood yet. Two people. One moment. And for once, in the middle of all the power and politics and ancient laws, something simply real. And there it is. The truth at the heart of this entire story. Zar-El did not choose Ethan because he was powerful. She did not choose him because he was impressive or wealthy or connected. She chose him because in a universe full of people performing for her, he was the first person who simply talked to her. That is the unexpected twist that ties this whole story together. The greatest empire in the known galaxy. 43 noble houses. Hundreds of the most powerful beings in existence. All of them failed. Not because they were weak. Because they were trying to win something. Ethan was not trying to win anything. And that, in the end, was the rarest thing in the universe. The amendment to the succession law passed, 37 days after it was submitted. Not unanimously. Nothing important ever is. But it passed. Lord Veth retired from his council position the following year. Quietly. Without incident. Emperor Drathan lived for another 4 years after the selection. He spent much of that time teaching Ethan about the empire. Not because Ethan would rule it, that was never the plan, but because Drathan was, at the end of his life, a father who wanted to know that his daughter had someone beside her, who genuinely understood what she was carrying. Zar-El took the throne at age 32. The first solo ruler in Velkari history. And Ethan Cole, former diplomatic security officer from Manchester, stayed on Velcor Prime. Not as consort, not as co-ruler, as himself, the person who had shown up to what he thought was a dinner and had simply kept being honest ever since. History, it turns out, is sometimes made by ordinary people who show up without a plan and say the true thing when everyone else is performing. If this story opened your eyes to what real courage looks like, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, stubborn, honest kind, you are not alone. So let's bring it all back to the beginning. At the start of this video, we asked you 3 questions. Why did the most feared princess in the known galaxy reject everyone who came before? What did one ordinary human do that nobody else could? And what happened after she made her choice? Now you know. She was not looking for power. She was not looking for a political alliance dressed up in royal robes. She was waiting, quietly, patiently, stubbornly, for someone who would look at her and see a person. Not a throne. Not an empire. Ethan Cole did not do anything extraordinary. He was not a hero in the traditional sense. He was just honest. Consistently, stubbornly, genuinely honest. In a universe where honesty had become the rarest resource of all, and that honesty changed everything. The story of Zar-El and Ethan is not just a sci-fi romance. It is a reminder that the most powerful thing any person, human or otherwise, can do is show up as themselves. Not perform. Not compete. Not try to win. Just be real. In a world that rewards performance, realness is revolutionary. Now here is something we want you to think about. If you were standing in that selection hall, with everything to gain and everything to lose, would you have had the courage to say the true thing? Or would you have said the safe thing? Leave your answer in the comments below. We genuinely want to know. And if this story hit something in you, if you felt that pull of recognition when Ethan said the honest thing nobody else would say, there is another story waiting for you right now on this channel. It is a story about another impossible connection. Another moment when the universe surprised everyone by being human, even when the people in it were not. Click the next video. You will not regret it. If you are new here, this channel is your home for the best sci-fi stories on YouTube. Stories about humans doing the impossible. Stories about courage and connection, and what happens when ordinary people walk into extraordinary situations. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because we put out new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. And if this story was worth your time, if it held you from beginning to end, hit the like button right now. It helps this channel reach more people who love exactly this kind of storytelling. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is simply telling the truth. We will see you in the next one.